cabra how, which is Gaelic for how are you, or welcome.
Is it something that you would have used as a child?
Not so much as a child, because although Gaelic is now very, very popular in Scotland, but coming from Arbroath, we didn't use Gaelic in schools. We spoke English. But since I latterly joined the army, one of my previous pipe majors spoke fluent Gaelic. He was from the Isle of Skye, and he taught us a few words, and one of them was cabra how.
Lovely, thank you. Could I take you back to your childhood? Could you tell me where you was born?
So I was born in Arbroath, which is a fishing village on the east coast of Scotland between Dundee and Aberdeen. There are about 25,000 occupants of Arbroath, and it's right on the coastline, so it's very similar to Grimsby. Very strong fishing heritage, and Arbroath's famous for not only having pipers, but for having the Arbroath smoky, which is a smoked fish, traditionally smoked in smoke houses, very close to the seafront, so that the fish would come straight into the market, the fish market, and then be bought by local fish houses and then smoked on the premises, and then sold from that same shop. So a very traditional way of smoking fish is what Arbroath's predominantly famous for.
Excellent. Can you tell me about your childhood?
I had a wonderful childhood. I have an elder brother and a younger brother, so I'm a middle of three. My father was a master butcher, so we had some wonderful food. I wasn't, and I'm not a vegetarian, probably because my father was a butcher, and my mother, that was her primary role in life, was to look after her husband and the three of us, which she had great joy in doing so, and it was quite hard, I think, in those days to look after three young boys. Some of my earliest memories, certainly educationally, was going to Arbroath Inverbrothick Primary School. Now, that Inverbrothick School is named after the Brothick, which is a small river or a burn that runs through the centre of Arbroath, and actually was quite close to where our school was. I would walk about half a mile to school, although my father, towards the end of my schooling, had a car for the first time. I would walk to school, and it would be about half a mile to school in all weathers. The playground, I remember, it wasn't grass, it was concrete, and the bicycle sheds looked like, well, we thought they looked like goalposts, so that's what they became. And we would spend most of our playtime using the play sheds or the cycle sheds as goalposts to play football. Unfortunately, above the bicycle sheds were some of the windows to some of the classrooms. So if you weren't very good at football, you would often be outside the headmaster's office because you perhaps got that one shot wrong and ended up smashing a window. I had lots of friends. I had friends in my street. Where I lived was a cul-de-sac, so there was only one way in and one way out of the street. And I had Neil Heron was a very good friend of mine. Ronnie Mowat was a friend of mine, and they all lived in the same street. And we would go and play football when we got to school. We would all go to school together, and we'd all come home together. Towards winter time was probably the time of year that I remember most coming from school, because at the way back home from school there was a foundry which made steel products, and from the top of the steel refinery you would see sparks flying, and you maybe wouldn't notice that in the summertime, but certainly in the winter when it started to get darker and started to get cold, you would see the sparks coming from the top of the foundry towards the sky. That's now a supermarket. That's now gone, unfortunately. But when I do go back up to Arbroath, I still manage to look at my old school, my old primary school, and which is changed now. It's now blocks of flats that the school's still there, but it's now occupied by people living there now, and it's blocks of flats. But the playground's still there, and the memories are still there, which is really, really important. I had, as I say, my friends Neil and Ronnie Mowat. We had a park very close by, possibly a couple of 100 metres from where we lived, and because we didn't have a park in the area right beside our house, we would often go to McDonald Park and play there. It had a football pitch, it had some swings and a roundabout, and all the things that you would really, really enjoy once you'd finished school. So we would go there regularly, especially at weekends. I'm an avid Arbroath Football Club supporter, so I remember going down to the football club on a Saturday and asking perhaps one of the older supporters if he would manage to sneak me in. So he would put me in front of himself into the turnstile, and then once in the ground, I would obviously go and join my friends. And I would always look out for my friends that were perhaps bigger club supporters as well as Arbroath, because they would have a Rangers shirt or a Rangers scarf or a Celtic scarf instead of me, and I would always support Arbroath. So I always support my local team. So that would always be something I look forward to. On a Saturday, the treat Mum used to make us, having come back from probably a very disappointed football game, would be macaroni and cheese. And my task would to grate the cheese, which would take quite some time because the cheese was normally quite hard, and it was to grate the cheese, and it was to sprinkle Scottish mature cheddar cheese on top of the macaroni towards the end of the cooking process. So that was my sum total of cooking when I was very younger. But it was a lovely hearty meal after watching Arbroath, which is the closest football ground to the sea. So in some ways, if you kick the ball in a certain direction, there has to be a little boat with a man in it, a row, and go and get the football back. And on some occasions, if the wind's wrong, you can see waves cascading onto the pitch as football is taking place. So it can be quite a horrific place to play football, even today's standards. So that's some of the memories of my early childhood. I started playing the bagpipes at the age of 10, and I joined the local Royal British Legion as a youngster, and I got to meet members of the armed forces, ex-members of the armed forces that would come to the Royal British Legion. I went there every Thursday night, and on a Monday night after school I would go to the British Legion to further my practices and to obviously get further tuition in learning the practice chanter, which you start off very much like a recorder that most children would play at school. And then from the practice chanter, I went on after about a year. So when I was about 11, I got my first set of bagpipes, a second-hand set that my father bought for me, and I started playing the bagpipes at the age of 11. And then from that point, the band, the Royal British Legion in Arbroath, started to compete around different competitions all over Scotland. So we went as far as Glasgow and Edinburgh and up to Aberdeen competing with the band, which was marvellous. And all the time I was very mindful of the heritage that the Royal British Legion has, which is this military heritage and military feeling to it.
Can I take you back just a little bit, Dominic?
Of course.
So you were 10 years old and you were a real football fan.
Absolutely.
So what was the draw of the bagpipes? What had interested you to make you want to go and learn this?
It was probably the regiment that I eventually joined, which was the Scots Guards, which are probably more famous for having bearskins and red tunics. But I remember seeing, at the age of 10, it was either the Edinburgh Tattoo on the television from the ramparts of Edinburgh Castle and the Esplanade, or it was Trooping the Colour from Horse Guards Parade in London, where there was certainly, it was on the television, and there was bagpipes, and I remember seeing that. My father, although he was a butcher, he was a very accomplished drummer, and he was a kit drummer, so he had cymbals and side drums and tom-tom drums, and he was absolutely proud as punch that I wanted to start the bagpipes. He was very, very proud of the fact that I wanted to do that, and he was very keen that I kept up that, and very proud of the fact that I latterly joined the army. But that was really, I suppose, the television and watching something that I thought I would love to be able to do that. That would be fantastic.
And the television would have been in black and white, so you
Oh
would
yes.
have seen the colours.
Oh no. And when you consider, when you look at tartans and the vast array of different colours that are in tartans, then you don't get that same effect in black and white, unfortunately. That's quite right.
So the sound of the pipes, was that also a draw for you? Was that easy on your ear? It was a nice sound for you?
Very much so. And the spectacle of seeing these, and it was a number of pipers. It wasn't just one. There was mass bands, so there was hundreds of pipers all playing with all these. It looked magnificent, even in black and white, with the different headdress, the feathers of the feather bonnets, the different uniforms that they had on, and the sound. I'd obviously heard bagpipes before as growing up in Scotland. I'd never actually, interestingly, heard the pipes probably very much at that stage live. So I'd never actually gone to see anything before I'd actually taken the bagpipes up, which is unusual perhaps, because some people see and hear things in real life before they would actually think about taking that up. But it was the television that actually encouraged me to do that.
Is it something that a lot of Scottish boys would be interested in trying, or was you unique?
At that time in Arbroath, because, as I said, the Royal British Legion had predominantly, it was made up of ex-servicemen who were all getting older, as we all do, and they were looking at recruiting young people. So at the time, I was about one of 15 youngsters that were all joining up, and they had a junior band and a more senior band, and they would filter the junior members of the band into the senior members, much like they do in any other band. So you'll have a senior band and the junior band. When you've reached a required standard, you'll filter in so that there's always new members joining the older band as people start to retire.
Did any of your friends who were doing football join with you, or was you the only one?
I was the only one from school and from my friends that actually decided to join the band. But I then made lots of new friends, and I still have some of those friends that I keep in contact with that I had in the band. So when we got to the latter teenage years of our life, I then went on to join the army, and some of my friends left Arbroath and got married, and they left to find other work elsewhere, etc. So they all splintered, but I still have friends that a very good friend of mine is still very, very a very key member of the Royal British Legion Band, and she's been there for over 40 years now.
So, before we move on to your adult life, I'm going to ask you a little bit about, you talked about the macaroni that your mum cooked you, but you're also a Scottish child.
Absolutely.
So, can you see any differences in the food that you would have eaten in Scotland to compare with the food that you eat in England? Yep. Are there any big differences?
My mum would prepare porridge in the morning for us. So she would soak the oats in a small pan the night before, so that the next morning she would then heat those oats in the water that would be soaking up. The oats would be soaking up the water, and then she would sprinkle. And now I shouldn't tell you this, but she sprinkled a little bit of sugar, because everybody thinks that it's salt that we all eat, but I sprinkled some sugar, so there you are, I've admitted it. So I had a sweet porridge. So I had just a little bit of sugar sprinkled over the top. And in those days, we used to have bottled milk, and we used to have the cream at the very top of the milk. And I remember, if I timed it just right, I could have that cold cream off the top of the milk in my porridge. But it wasn't enough to soak the porridge, it was just enough to cool it down ever so slightly and give it that lovely feel to it. And that porridge would last me at least all the way to school and to into lunchtime.